Sit here, Grandma. Let's see if you still remember how to play cards. Richard Blackwell pushed Dona Rosa toward the poker table in his Manhattan penthouse, his words laced with venom disguised as fun. The 72-year-old woman, mother of his housekeeper, looked confused at the cards scattered across the green felt. The charity party guests laughed loudly when they saw the black lady, with her gray hair and simple dress, being positioned among the city's wealthiest businessmen. They were all wearing suits that cost more than an entire family's annual salary. "That's too cruel, Richard," whispered Patricia, a socialite, but her mischievous smile gave away that she was loving the show. The poor thing can barely remember her own name. Dona Rosa slowly sat down in the Italian leather chair, her eyes scanning the faces around the table. For a moment, the confusion seemed to dissipate slightly, like fog being blown away by the wind. She touched the cards with surprising delicacy. "My mother isn't well, Mr. Richard," begged Carmen the maid, her hands trembling as she served champagne. "Please let her rest in her room." "Relax, Carmen. It's just a little harmless fun," Blackwell laughed, dealing colorful chips in front of Dona Rosa. "If your mommy wins, who knows? I might raise your salary. If she loses," he paused dramatically, "well, maybe you two will need to look for new jobs." The room fell silent for a second before exploding into laughter. Cell phones emerged from expensive pockets. This was guaranteed to be a viral video. An Alzheimer's patient being humiliated by rich people in a game she clearly didn't understand. But something strange happened when Dona Rosa held the cards. Her fingers, which moments before had trembled with age, now moved with almost mechanical precision. She arranged the cards in a perfect fan, her eyes studying each face with an intensity that made some guests stop laughing. "Let's start with Texas Hold," Blackwell announced confidently. "Simple rules for a simple mind." Carmen watched in horror from the corner of the room. In recent months, her mother could barely remember her own name, confused familiar faces, and repeated the same questions dozens of times a day. How could she survive this public humiliation? But as the first cards were dealt, something changed in Dona Rosa's gaze. The mental fog that consumed her daily seemed to lift, as if the cards had awakened some deeply buried memory. She touched a blue chip, then looked directly at Blackwell. "How much is this worth, my son?" she asked in a soft but firm voice. $1,000, Grandma. More money than you've seen in your entire life." Dona Rosa nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. There, surrounded by predators in expensive suits, something ancient and powerful was beginning to awaken. Something these arrogant millionaires had no idea even existed. If you're enjoying this story of an underestimated lady who may hold secrets deeper than her own medical condition, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what these rich guys didn't know was that they were about to discover that memory may fail, but certain skills never die completely. "Let me explain the rules to you, Grandma," Blackwell said, leaning over the table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's quite simple. Even someone with your condition can understand." He dealt 2 cards to each player around the table. Besides him and Dona Rosa, there was Patricia Whitman, a socialite oiler, and James Morrison, owner of a chain of luxury hotels. Everyone watched the scene as if they were watching a particularly cruel comedy film. "If you win this round, which we know is impossible," Blackwell laughed loudly, "I'll donate $50,000 to that charity that takes care of confused old people. But when you lose," he paused dramatically, "Carmen loses her job today. No notice, no severance pay, no references. Carmen almost dropped the tray of champagne she was carrying. 4 years of honest work. The savings she had put together penny by penny to pay for her mother's treatment. The small room at the back of the building where they lived for free. Everything now depended on a game her mother could barely understand. "Richard, that's inhumane even by your standards," Patricia murmured, though she continued filming with her cell phone. "Inhumane is pretending that these people are equal to us," Blackwell replied coldly. "I'm just demonstrating the natural order of things. People like that belong serving, not sitting at the table with their superiors." Dona Rosa remained silent, studying her cards with a concentration that surprised the observers. Her hands, which Carmen knew trembled when trying to hold a cup of coffee, now held the cards with absolute firmness. "Let's start slowly," Blackwell announced, pushing a single blue chip to the center of the table. $1,000 to see if Grandma has the guts. What happened next made the entire penthouse fall silent. Dona Rosa didn't just match the bet, she doubled it. 2,000, she said in a crystal-clear voice, pushing 2 chips to the center without hesitation. Carmen covered her mouth with her hands. Her mother couldn't remember where she kept her own medications, but she had just made a $2,000 bet with the confidence of an experienced gambler. "Interesting," James Morrison murmured, putting down his cell phone for the first time that evening. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Dona Rosa looked directly at him, and for a moment, the fog of age seemed to dissipate completely from her eyes. "I'm more sure than you can imagine, my son." Blackwell felt a pang of irritation. This wasn't going according to plan. The old woman should be confused, scared, begging for mercy. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Very well. Grandma wants to play grown-up," he growled, raising the bet to 5,000. "Let's see if you still have all that confidence when things get serious." It was then that Carmen remembered something she had completely forgotten. A conversation from years ago before the disease began to consume her mother's memories. Dona Rosa telling her about her youth in Las Vegas, when she worked as a cocktail waitress in the city's most exclusive casinos. "I didn't just serve drinks, my dear," she had said with a mysterious gleam in her eyes. "When there were no customers, the dealers taught me the games. 50 years ago, I was known at certain tables as La Rosa Silenciosa, the Silent Rose. I never spoke during the games. I just watched and played. I earned enough money to buy our first house." Carmen had never given much thought to that story. It seemed like just another of the many reminiscences her mother shared about a past that sometimes mixed reality with fantasy. But now, seeing the complete transformation in Dona Rosa's demeanor, she began to wonder if there was much more truth in those words than she had imagined. The first round of community cards was revealed. Ace of Hearts, King of Spades, Queen of Diamonds. A sequence that made Blackwell smile with satisfaction. He had a pair of kings, a strong hand for a first round. 10,000 he declared, pushing a stack of red chips into the center. Time to separate the amateurs from the professionals. Dona Rosa studied the community cards for a long moment. Then she did something that left the entire room speechless. She didn't just match the 10,000 bet. She raised it to 20,000. 40 years of playing poker has taught me one thing, my son, she said softly, pushing the chips with precise movements that revealed an impressive familiarity with the game. Arrogance is the greatest enemy of any player. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. Patricia had stopped filming, and was staring at the woman she had moments before considered just a poor thing with mental problems. James Morrison was mentally calculating the odds, trying to understand how a woman with Alzheimer's could be playing with the precision of a professional. But it was Blackwell who felt the first chill of real fear running down his spine. Because at that moment, looking into Dona Rosa's eyes, he no longer saw a confused and fragile mind. He saw decades of experience, strategy, and a sharp intelligence that the disease had not been able to completely destroy. Each new humiliation they tried to impose only strengthened something within her that these privileged people could not see. A silent strength fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. What those rich people didn't know was that each act of contempt was awakening memories of a woman who had already faced much bigger bets and emerged victorious from tables where powerful men underestimated the silent danger sitting in front of them. The next 3 community cards were revealed. Ace of Diamonds, 9 of Clubs, 3 of Swords. Blackwell's hand had improved. He now had 2 pairs, aces and kings. An extremely strong hand that made him smile with renewed arrogance. "It's time to teach some lessons, Grandma," he declared, pushing all his chips into the center of the table. $50,000 all in. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Patricia covered her mouth with her hands. James Morrison stopped breathing and Carmen felt her legs buckle. $50,000 was more money than her family would see in 5 years of work. Dona Rosa studied the community cards for a long moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Then something extraordinary happened. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, and when she opened them again, the fog of confusion had completely disappeared. "My son," she said in a firm, clear voice. "You just made the same mistake I saw hundreds of men make at the tables in Las Vegas 50 years ago. You bet everything on a good hand when you should have watched for signs that you were facing a better hand." And then she did the unthinkable. She matched the $50,000 bet. Carmen had to lean against the wall. Her mother, who last week had forgotten how to turn on the stove, had just made the biggest bet of her life with the confidence of a professional gambler. It was at that moment that fragments of memories began to connect in Carmen's mind. Old conversations she had never taken seriously, stories she thought were fantasies of a mind that was beginning to fail. "I worked at Caesar's Palace for 12 years, Dona Rosa had said on a rainy afternoon, months before the diagnosis. "Not just as a waitress, Carmen. When the tables were empty after 3 o'clock in the morning, the dealers taught me the games. Frank Sinatra once lost $500 to me in a poker game. Elvis too. They respected me because I never spoke during the game. I just watched and played. That's why they called me La Rosa Silenciosa, the Silent Rose." Carmen had always thought these were delusions of grandeur, memories distorted by age. But now, seeing the complete transformation in her mother's demeanor, every word of those stories took on a different weight. "Impossible," Blackwell muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the pile of chips Dona Rosa had pushed over. "She doesn't even know what day it is. How can she be playing like this?" "Alzheimer's affects different parts of the memory in different ways," explained Dr. Patricia Morgan, a neurologist who was among the guests and had remained silent until then. "Procedural memories, skills learned through constant repetition, can remain intact long after other cognitive functions deteriorate." Carmen approached the table, finally understanding what she was witnessing. Her mother was not having a moment of lucidity. Poker was awakening dormant neurons, activating brain circuits forged by decades of practice that even the disease had not been able to completely destroy. Mom whispered. Carmen, were you really a professional gambler? Dona Rosa smiled for the first time that night. A smile that carried decades of memories struggling to return to the surface. Not professional, my daughter, but for 12 years from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. I faced some of the greatest players in the world. I earned enough money to support us when your father abandoned us. The revelation hit Carmen like a bolt of lightning. She had always wondered how her mother had managed to raise her alone, paying for private school and maintaining a decent life on just a waitress's salary. Now she knew while serving drinks, Dona Rosa was also winning fortunes at the poker tables of Las Vegas' most exclusive casinos. When I stopped gambling, Dona Rosa continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. It was because I wanted you to grow up far away from that world. But the skills remained. They stayed here. She touched her temple, waiting for the right moment to return. Blackwell was visibly shaken. What had started as a cruel joke was turning into something he couldn't control. This is ridiculous. She has dementia. She can't be thinking clearly. Actually, Dr. Morgan interjected, fascinated by what she was observing. What we are seeing is a phenomenon known as preserved procedural memory. It's like a pianist with Alzheimer's who can still play Chopin perfectly even though they can't remember their own name. Motor and strategic skills can remain intact. Carmen realized something else at that moment. Her mother wasn't just playing poker. She was fighting her own disease. Every card, every bet, every strategic decision was an act of resistance against the fog that was trying to consume her mind. For weeks, Carmen had watched her mother waste away, losing pieces of herself every day. But there at that table, Dona Rosa was reclaiming lost territory, forcing dormant synapses to awaken through sheer willpower and mental muscle. Moment of truth, Blackwell announced, turning over his cards with a forced smile. 2 pairs, aces and kings. The room held its breath. It was a genuinely strong hand, the kind of combination that wins most poker games. Dona Rosa looked at her own cards, then at the community cards, and finally at the man who had tried to humiliate her. 50 years ago, she said softly. An arrogant Texan like you tried to bluff me at a table at the Flamingo. You ended up losing your entire ranch. She turned over her cards, 10 and Jack of Hearts. With the community card showing Ace of Hearts, King of Spades, Queen of Diamonds, Ace of Diamonds, and 9 of Clubs, she had completed a straight 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. A high straight, the second best possible hand in poker. The penthouse erupted in gasps of shock. Patricia knocked over her champagne glass. James Morrison let out a curse, and even the waiter stopped to watch the impossible. A 72-year-old woman with Alzheimer's had just beaten a billionaire in a $100,000 bet. Carmen felt tears roll down her face. They were not tears of relief for the money, but of pride at seeing her mother regain, even if only temporarily, the dignity and sparkle that the disease had been slowly stealing from her. How is this possible? Blackwell stammered, staring at the cards as if they might magically change. You made the classic mistake of powerful men, replied Dona Rosa, organizing the chips with precise movements that showed decades of practice. You confused luck with skill, money with intelligence, and power with competence. At the tables in Vegas, I learned that the most dangerous opponents are always the ones you underestimate. The victory had awakened something deep within her. The memories fighting against the fog of Alzheimer's were winning, at least temporarily. Each chip she stacked was a victory, not only over Blackwell, but over the disease itself that was trying to erase who she really was. What no one in that room realized yet was that this victory was just the warm-up. Dona Rosa wasn't just fighting for money or dignity. She was fighting to prove to herself that she still existed, that she was still capable, that the strong, intelligent woman she once was hadn't completely disappeared. And when a person fights against their own oblivion, no bet is high enough to make them back down. That was luck, Blackwell muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he watched the chips being stacked on Dona Rosa's side. A confused old woman couldn't have beaten me legitimately. But Patricia Whitman was filming everything and her words were clearly captured on audio. Richard, did you just call a lady a confused old woman after she beat you in a $100,000 bet? She doesn't even know where she is. Blackwell exploded, completely losing the composure he had been trying to maintain. Look at her. She probably doesn't even remember her own name. That's when Dona Rosa did something that silenced the entire penthouse. She slowly got up, walked over to a bookcase, and took out a photo album that Blackwell kept as decoration. With precise movements, she flipped to a specific page. Las Vegas, 1974, she said in a crystal-clear voice, pointing to a yellowed photograph. Poker tournament at Caesar's Palace. That young woman in the blue dress in the center of the table. That's me. Rosa Delgado, known as La Rosa Silenciosa. The room exploded with murmurs. Carmen approached incredulous. There was her mother, decades younger, sitting at a professional poker table surrounded by men in suits, an impressive stack of chips in front of her. Impossible, James Morrison whispered, studying the photo. That's the same tournament where my father lost $50,000. He always talked about a mysterious woman that no one could read. Dr. Patricia Morgan, the neurologist, approached, fascinated. That explains everything. ALZHEIME'S didn't destroy her procedural skills because they were solidified by decades of intensive practice. It's like neural muscle forged by time. Blackwell was visibly shaken, but his arrogance would not allow him to accept defeat. Even so, that was 50 years ago. She can't be thinking clearly now. I want a new game, higher stakes. Be careful what you wish for, my son, Dona Rosa replied softly, returning to the table. You've already lost $100,000. How much more are you willing to lose to prove your superiority? $200,000, Blackwell declared, pushing forward a new stack of chips. I'll in again. But this time, I want everyone to see when I destroy this sham. Carmen tried to intervene. Mom, maybe it's better to stop here. No, my daughter, Dona Rosa replied, organizing her chips with professional precision. Some men only learn when they lose everything. And this man needs a lesson he'll never forget. The second hand was dealt. Blackwell received a pair of queens, an extremely strong hand. His confidence returned immediately. Now we are talking, he muttered, betting aggressively from the start. Dona Rosa looked at her cards and did something surprising. She matched every bet without hesitation. Even when Blackwell raised to $50,000, then $100,000, then $200,000. You're bluffing, Blackwell declared when it was time to show the cards. A woman with dementia can't maintain a $200,000 bluff. You're right, Dona Rosa smiled. I'm not bluffing. She turned over her cards. 2 aces, ace of spades and ace of hearts. The table was showing ace of diamonds, king of clubs, 7 of spades, 3 aces against a pair of queens. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. Blackwell was staring at the $500,000 he had just lost to a lady he had tried to publicly humiliate. How was all he could whisper? "You telegraphed your strength from the moment you looked at your cards," Dona Rosa explained calmly. "Your nostrils flared, your shoulders tensed, and you tapped your watch 3 times. In Vegas, we learned to read those signs like neon letters. You're not a player, my son. You're just a rich man who thinks money can replace skill." That's when Patricia decided to twist the knife. "Richard, do you have any idea who this lady is?" "I did some research while they were playing." She showed the screen of her cell phone to the room. Rosa Delgado was one of the few women to compete in men's tournaments in the 1970s. She won the World Series of Poker in 1975 in the women's category, and was among the 10 finalists in the overall category in 1976. Carmen covered her face with her hands overcome with emotion. Her mother wasn't just a former player. She was a legend. $500,000. Dona Rosa announced, stacking the chips meticulously. "Enough money to pay for the experimental Alzheimer's treatment in Zurich that you, my son, with all your wealth, never offered to help with when you learned of my condition through Carmen." The accusation hit Blackwell like a public slap in the face. Everyone knew he had known about Dona Rosa's diagnosis for months, and had never lifted a finger to help. And now, she continued, her voice gaining an authority that made even the waiter stop to listen. "All of you who filmed hoping to see a poor lady humiliated, are you going to post those videos anyway? Or maybe you've learned something about underestimating people based on appearances." The penthouse was in total shock. Cell phones were quickly put away, conversations whispered, and many of the guests looked shamefully at the floor. Blackwell, realizing that he had lost not only $500,000, but also his reputation among Manhattan's elite, made one last desperate attempt to save face. "This isn't over," he declared, his voice cracked with anger and humiliation. "I am going to sue for fraud for abuse of a mentally disabled person for why." Dona Rosa interrupted him gently for being defeated honestly in public with dozens of witnesses, and recordings showing that you forced a sick lady to place bets she never asked for. The reality of the situation finally hit Blackwell hard. Not only had he lost $500,000, but he had done so while being filmed by his own guests in a public display of cruelty that had now been turned against him in a devastating way. Carmen hugged her mother, tears of pride and relief streaming down her face. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about your trophies, about who you really were?" "Because my daughter," Dona Rosa replied, caressing her daughter's face. "Some lessons can only be taught when the time is right. And today was the right time to teach this man that true nobility does not come from bank accounts." The transformation was complete. The confused Lady Blackwell, had tried to use for entertainment, had revealed herself to be a master of the game, exposing him as the cruel predator he really was. In front of all the social elite he had tried so hard to impress. As the guests began to discreetly make their way to the exit, many avoiding eye contact with Blackwell, one question hung in the air. How would a man, who had just been so publicly humiliated, react? And more importantly, how far was Dona Rosa willing to go to ensure that men like Blackwell would never again underestimate people like her and Carmen? 6 months later, the transformation was complete and irrefutable. Dona Rosa walked through the corridors of the Zurich Neurological Clinic, her mind clearer than it had been in years, thanks to the experimental treatment financed by the $500,000 Blackwell had unwittingly paid. The Alzheimer's had not disappeared, but the innovative therapies had dramatically slowed its progression. Mom, Dr. Mueller said you can come home next week. Carmen smiled, sitting next to the bed. She herself had changed completely. Now she wore the executive blazer of the charitable foundation she had created with the money from her poker win. The Silent Rose Foundation had already raised another $2 million after the video of the game went viral. Celebrities, ethical business people, and ordinary people had come together to support Alzheimer's treatments and combat prejudice against the elderly across the country. Richard Blackwell was on his third job interview of the week, trying to land a basic administrative position. The recording of his cruelty to Dona Rosa had completely destroyed his reputation. His company lost billion-dollar contracts. His wife filed for divorce and his children refused to speak to him. "Please, I need this job," he begged the human resources manager of a small accounting firm. "I promise I've changed." But the internet never forgets. The hashtag #RosaWins was still trending worldwide whenever someone faced age or racial prejudice and won through intelligence. Patricia Whitman, who had filmed everything, now presided over an anti-discrimination institute. "That night changed my perspective forever," she said in interviews. "I saw how my own arrogance blinded me to the greatness that was right in front of me." The most exciting moment came when Dona Rosa received an invitation to be an honorary consultant for the World Series of Poker. At 73, La Rosa Silenciosa was back in the world that had made her famous decades earlier. "Do you know what I learned on this whole journey?" Dona Rosa asked Carmen, as they organized the cards for a family game in the new apartment they had bought in Manhattan. "What, Mom?" "That memory can fail, but dignity never dies. And when you're underestimated by people who confuse money with intelligence," she smiled, dealing the cards with perfect movements, "you have the chance to teach them the most valuable lesson they'll ever receive." Dona Rosa's story proved that true victory is not in destroying those who despise you, but in rising so high that they have to break their necks to look at you. Blackwell tried to humiliate a woman with Alzheimer's, but ended up being defeated by the strength he could never buy. The resilience of those who turn pain into power. If this story of a woman who turned prejudice into victory touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that the best revenge is success your enemies could never imagine.